everyone. Welcome to this new class entitled Gender. In this chapter, we will briefly discuss main issues and main concerns about gender and anthropology. For instance, are men and women born or made? Are there more than two sexes? How do anthropologists explore the relationship between gender and power? And again, how is globalization transforming gender roles and stratification? We will first try to define what is sex and what is gender. This will be mainly based on theories of gender. And then we will discuss stereotypes associated with gender. And finally, we'll talk about gender inequality. Let's move on first with a broad definition between sex and gender, since it is important to distinguish the two. Sex is usually what is associated with biology, and gender is related to culture. This is the main distinction you should have in mind: sex, biology, and gender, culture. So here, sex would be defined as biological features. I'm going to elaborate a little bit on that. And gender is the social and cultural attributes attached to sex. So anthropologists explore the implications of those constructions for the men and women in each context. And it is important for anthropologists to try to understand what are the gender roles that are played in a group or in a society. So, sex is biological features. What do I mean exactly by that? And let's have a look to how we can define sex. Then we will do the same with gender. So sex is usually determined by few biological criteria that are looked at. First, we can mention genitalia. In order to know if a person is a female or a male, usually we look at genitalia. Then hormones also can be another element that is checked. So progesterone and estrogen for female and testosterone for men. So the level of those hormones will be checked. And then chromosome, XX versus XY. So XX is female and XY is male. So those three criteria are looked at in order to know if a person is a male or a female. So this is entirely related to biology. Right now, let's look a little bit more closer at gender. Oh, by the way, I wanted to mention that in our species, so Homo sapiens, humans, there are actually only few differences between males and females. If we compare to other species, men are usually taller and women are usually stronger. And women live usually longer, but men have more physical capacity. However, women have more long-term physical endurance. But these differences, what is called sexual dimorphism, so it's the phenotypic differences between males and females of the same species, they are actually less than for other species. If you compare, for instance, with some birds, if we take the peacock, for instance, male peacock, has these beautiful and very colorful feathers, whether the female doesn't, since the female is brown. So there are a lot of birds that are like that. Or if you take the lion, for example, the male lion is much more different than the female one, in terms of size, in terms of physical appearance, and also physical abilities somehow. All right, now let's look at gender. What is gender exactly? So I told you that gender is related to culture, and gender is considered to be a social and cultural construction for anthropology. So humans are born with a biological sex, but they learned, they are enculturate. If you remember the term that we studied in the chapter on culture. So we learn how to behave like a man or like a woman. So we learn to be women and men. It's not something that we were born with. It's something that we have been enculturated to and that we have learned through our family, friends, the media, doctors, educational institutions, religious communities, sports, law. All of these institutions enculturate us with a sense of gender that then becomes normative and that seems completely natural. For example, parents do gender their children. They assign their boy or girl names. They dress them in appropriate gendered clothing, colors, jewelry, and they give them the right haircut, right? Usually, at least in the Western world, long hair for girls and short hair for boys. Parents even speak to their children in gender tones of voice. And that's what we discussed. Well, that's actually the question I gave you at the end of the previous chapter. Do men and women speak differently? It seems that yes, they do, because they have been enculturated to do so. So gender is performed all around us. So we learn to perform it in our turn. And these ways, gender is taught, learned, performed, and policed. So this is what anthropologists are looking at. Now, based on what we usually learn about what is supposed to be a woman behavior or woman characteristics and what is supposed to be a male one, there are some stereotypes that are formed around those specificities, male or female. So let's have a quick look at what is usually associated with masculinity and femininity. This is based on a research done by an assistant professor in a university in the US who questioned his students, asking them what are the words that comes to your mind when you think of male and when you think of female, when you think of masculinity and when you think of femininity. And here are the terms that were given by his students. So here are some common oversimplified ideas about what is supposed to be masculine and what is supposed to be feminine. That's, by the way, the definition of a stereotype. A stereotype is an oversimplified idea about a group of people. So here for masculinity, students used adjectives such as aggressive, physical, tough, competitive, sports-oriented, testosterone-driven, strong, and unemotional. And here were the adjective given for femininity: gentle, kind, loving, nurturing, smart, persuasive, talkative, enticing, and emotional. So here were the stereotypes used by the students. And it is something that we found not only among students, but here are some general ideas that people would have on gender and how is gender performed for male and for female. Now, we talked about gender enculturation briefly. I would like us to look at specific ways we learn how to differentiate what is supposed to be feminine and what is supposed to be masculine. If you look at these two pictures here, you can easily guess, I'm sure, what is supposed to be for female and what is supposed to be for men. Let's start first with the picture on top here. So for the body wash product, the one on the right side would be for men, and the one on the left side would be for female. I'm sure you have guessed that pretty easily. And how do we guess it? First, we look at colors. So here for female, it would be more pinkish, reddish, a lighter, brighter color. Whether for male, it would be a dark, supposedly associated with straight color. So here black and orange. Then we can look at the font as well that is used. Usually for female, it's more soft, it's more elegant, it's smoother, and for male it would be more tough again. It would appear as more strong. Then we can look at designs. We can look at some image that are there. For those two, it's not particularly obvious, but for some products, if you take, for example, razors, that would be significant. Now let's look at the picture at the bottom here on the right side. Here are, some chocolate Kinder for kids, and again, we can guess that there is one for boy and one for girl just by looking at colors here. So the blue one would be for boy and the pink one would be for girl. So we have been enculturated to distinguish genders based on first colors, usually blue for boys, pink for girls. Now it's also with toys, and if you go to any toys shop in any malls, you would perfectly be able to distinguish what is supposed to be for boys and for girls, because usually for boys it would be cars, tools to repair, to fix things. It would be some Superman, Spider-Man, superhero type of toys. It would be like plastic guns, any types of weapons, plastic weapons, to make war, to pretend to make war. Whether for female, it would be more like dolls, of course, Barbies, fake makeup, anything that is related with beauty and appearance. And kids do learn how to perform gender since we were kids, because usually female would have this little place to cook and to clean, whether for boy it would be a little place to fix things and so on. Now clothes, of course, so more dress skirts for girls in the Western culture at least, and short pants for boys, but again it depends on the cultural context. Games could be also gendered, and yeah, girls would tend to play some specific games and not others. And then there are also ways of talking to boys or girls. So encourage behavior, like for instance this expression, hit like a girl or act like a lady, or like boys don't cry. This would also reinforce the gender stereotype or the gender role and performance. Now that we have explained the difference between sex and gender and what is it approximately, of course it's not exhaustive, it is only an overview on this topic, just to give you an idea of on what is it and how do anthropologists address that topic. I would like now us to question this binarity, since there is in our world mainly two gender, right, male and female. I would like us to question more than two sexes. So are there more than two sexes? So more than two sexes. You probably have heard of transgender. So transgender is a gender identity or performance that does not fit with cultural norms related to one's assigned sex at birth. So, for instance, male sex, or a person with a male assigned sex at birth that would perform and behave and feel like a female gender, female role. So that would be the case. I have added here a picture of a very relevant example of transgender in the Hawaiian society. It's the person Mahu. So Mahu used to be traditionally in Hawaii, in the Pacific Islands, in the Pacific Ocean. Mahu used to be a person that would combine both characteristics of male and female. Mahu was initially in the traditional culture, Hawaiian culture, the person who will teach how to behave to women, for instance, the art of dancing, singing, and who would teach also the art to behave like a man, for instance, to know how to fight. Here are the two pictures, the two characters, sorry. So Mahu would combine both. There is another example. I will post, by the way, a video discussing this. And just to let you know that there is another example in Indonesia, in one of the remote islands of Indonesia, where five genders are seen and performed. So there is the sex male performing male, the sex female performing female gender, and then transgender type. So the sex male performing female role and the sex female performing male role. And then there's the bisu. Bisu would be a little bit like the Mahu, who combine both characteristics. So that would make 5 gender. So I just wanted to give you those examples to make you realize that here we do have in our world 2 main genders. However, it's not often the case everywhere in the world. For instance, Hawaii or Indonesia, this island in Indonesia. Remember that it's not everywhere in Indonesia, it's in one particular island. I will also post a video discussing this. And just also to make you question the world that we are living in, because that's what anthropologists do. Let's continue on that topic discussing, so this is definitely related to gender, okay? Transgender, it's a different role performed within the society than the assigned sex at birth, right? Now let's discuss the sex part. So this is gender, and now let's discuss the sex part. So more than 2 sexes. If you take the example, and here again I will post an article about this lady, very well-known female athlete called Caster Semenya. Caster Semenya is a South African athlete. She won actually a gold medal in the gold medal in 2012 in London, and then in 2016 in Rio de Janeiro for the 800 meter. Caster Semenya was born a female with female genitalia. However, she naturally has an elevated testosterone level. So naturally, she has a very high level of testosterone, which is the male hormone. So Caster Semenya is considered for some people as an intersex, what we call an intersex. An intersex is a person that would combine both female and male biological attributes. I'm going to elaborate a little bit more on that in a second. Just before, I just wanted to let you know about this very interesting article written by Anne Foster Sterling called Why Male and Female Are Not Enough. And it's she discusses a theory of 5 sexes, and she says that male and female are not enough to discuss. So the sex, we're not talking about gender here, are not enough to talk about humans. So she said that we need to add more sexes because there are some people that were actually born with both characteristics, and then it can take many different forms and aspects. This is what used to be called hermaphrodite. It is now called intersex. So approximately 1.7% of the people, so it's worldwide, do not conform to the ideal of absolute sex, chromosome, genitalia, and hormonal. So there are people that combine both. So for instance, it could be like Caster Semenya, it could be a female genitalia, however, with a male hormone, or at least with a lot of male hormones, testosterone. Or it could be the other way around. It could be a female genitalia with a lot of female hormones, estrogen or progesterone. Or it could be the genitalia could look like a combination of both. So with like a micro penis and somehow clitoris as well. Well, it could be many different forms, and most of the time, what used to happen is that doctors would, without asking to the parents if they would like that or not, but for any ambiguous genitalia, doctors would automatically transform babies, so operate, do a surgery on babies to make them look like either male or female, and mostly because it's easier to do that surgery, they would make them look like female. So keep in mind that yes, there are two main sexes, biological sexes, but it's important to question also if there are not more, and that's what anthropologists were trying to do, because, for instance, there is intersex people who combine both characteristics. Okay, the last part of this chapter would be on gender inequality. So the big question here is, are men and women equal? Now, I don't know what is your opinion on that. I'm sure your opinion would vary depending on where you come from. Where did you grow up to? So did you grow up in Europe or in Africa or in Asia? Then, of course, what you will answer would vary. But overall, here we talk worldwide. We can say that inequality still exists between men and women. In terms of what? Inequality exists in terms of first education, because if you look at numbers, 2/3 of the illiterate adult population are women. So here, women, even though it's changing, right? Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that it's everywhere the case, but worldwide, women are still less educated than men. Now, if we look at economic resources, approximately 60% of the world's poorest people are women, right? Because for them, since most of them do not have a good education, or less of them do not have a good education, then it might be harder to find a job, or maybe they have to take care of the children, so they cannot afford getting a job. Now, if we look at political representatives, also 22% of the world's parliamentarians are women only, so only 22%. And by the way, in this case, it's not only less developed countries, because in the West there are also lack of female representatives in politics. Sicknesses. women tend to have more sicknesses if we take, so in terms of health, right? Health is still an issue, and females have less access to treatment, medical treatment. If we take the example of HIV, so AIDS, women are infected 3 times faster than men. So this is still a big issue. And wages in terms of salary, so female earn less than male, so women earn less than men without any reasons, so if you take a man and a woman working in the same company, if you take them, they have the same age, same diploma, same background, same education, they work hard, they have the same level, okay? The man would earn more than the female, so without any reason. So this is still a big evidence of inequality. Why is that? Because that's what we call, as anthropologists, that's what we call, and sociologists, gender stratification. So the gender stratification is the uneven distribution of privileges, material rewards, opportunities, power, prestige, and influence between men and women. So it means that there is still a hierarchy between men and women, and women tend to be less privileged compared to men. They have less access to education, they have less opportunities in terms of jobs. When they have a job, they earn less than men, and there is still here a hierarchy between the two. I know a lot of countries are trying to reduce that. It's something that is really changing and that is really taken into consideration by many governments in the world. But I'm talking here in general, and it's still happening everywhere. All right, this is the end of our chapter on gender. It was a short chapter. I hope that you understood very well the distinction between sex and gender. So remember, sex is related to biology, gender is related to the social and cultural context. And you should also know about gender enculturation, transgender, and intersex. I thank you very much for your attention. Next week, I'm sorry because we are running a little bit late on the progress of the course. But next week we will now discuss race and racism and ethnicity and nationality. Thank you, and see you very soon.